What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 1 Final Look. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over each position and break down a couple of my favorite players for this NFL DFS main slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, NFL Week 1. I'm so happy to have NFL back. I hope everyone enjoys their Sunday. So now let's get into this 12-game main slate. Okay, looking at the quarterback position, I like Matt Ryan from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Seattle Seahawks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Matt Ryan averaged 21.3 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 2.3 rush attempts per game, and he's going to be about 9% owned here in Week 1, projected at 19.2 fantasy points. He's $6,700 DraftKings salary and $1,100 more on FanDuel. I just love this game. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, so a super high scoring game with the Atlanta Falcons trailing by 2.5. So the Seattle Seahawks are favored by 2.5. This should be a close game, a competitive game. I think it's going to be a shootout between these two quarterbacks. So I like Matt Ryan here versus the Seattle Seahawks. Okay, and if you're looking to pay down at the quarterback position here in Week 1, take a look at Jimmy Garoppolo from the San Francisco 49ers playing the Arizona Cardinals, who had the second worst defense overall, and they gave up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Jimmy Garoppolo averaged 17.2 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 2.9 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 6% owned here in Week 1, projected at 17.7 fantasy points. He's $5,800 DraftKings salary and $1,500 more on FanDuel. So this is another high-scoring game. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the San Francisco 49ers favored by 6.5. So I like Jimmy Garoppolo here versus the Arizona Cardinals. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. I like Austin Ekeler from the LA Chargers playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who had the 6th worst defense. They had the 8th worst defense overall last year, and they gave up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Austin Ekeler averaged 20.2 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 6.8 pass attempts per game and 8.3 rushes per game. So it's those targets that I like, especially on DraftKings where it's a full point per reception. If he catches 5 balls for 50 yards, that's 10 fantasy points right there, on top of what he gets on the rushing yards and if he gets into the end zone. So that gives him some nice upside here, and he's going to be about 12% owned, projected at 19.8 fantasy points here in Week 1. He's $7,000 DraftKings salary and $700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 42 points scored in this game, and they have the Chargers favored by 2.5. So it should be a competitive game. They're not expecting a blowout here, so Austin Ekeler should get plenty of work. So I like Austin Ekeler here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, the other running back that I like here in Week 1 is Chris Carson from the Seattle Seahawks playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing running backs. Chris Carson averaged 17 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 3.1 pass targets per game and 18.5 rush attempts per game. So he was over that magical 20 plus touches per game, and he is going to be about 10% owned, projected at 14.6 fantasy points here in week 1. He's 6,200 DraftKings salary and 1,000 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 49 points scored in this game, with the Seattle Seahawks favored by 2.5. I think this is a great game to stack, so I like Chris Carson here versus the Atlanta Falcons.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So it looks like Mike Evans is going to be out here in week 1, and if that is the case, I really like Chris Godwin from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they gave up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers last year. Chris Godwin was averaging 21 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 8.6 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 5% owned, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that ownership come up a little bit, especially if Mike Evans is out. Chris Godwin was on the field for 83% of the snaps last year, and he's got Tom Brady throwing him the ball this year, so that should bode well for him. He's projected at 17.1 fantasy points here in week 1. He's 7,100 DraftKings salary and 600 more on FanDuel. So Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points in this game, high-scoring game, with the Tampa Bay Bucks trailing by 3.5. So Chris Godwin could get a lot of work, especially if they're trailing the Saints, playing from behind, with Tom Brady at the helm. So I like Chris Godwin here versus the New Orleans Saints. Okay, if you're looking for a value play here at the wide receiver position, take a look at Deshaun Jackson from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Washington football team, who had the 4th worst defense overall last year and gave up the 11th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Deshaun Jackson averaged 13.3 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 3.3 pass targets per game. So those pass targets per game are a little bit low, but it's because this guy's got phenomenal big play making ability. He can catch an 80-yard touchdown pass for a touchdown, get all your fantasy production in 1 or 2 plays. He's going to be about 7% owned here, projected at 12 fantasy points here in week 1. He's only 4,900 DraftKings salary and 700 more on FanDuel. And just real quick, he scored 38 fantasy points in his game versus the Washington football team last year. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 42.5 points scored in this game, with the Philadelphia Eagles favored by 5.5. So I like Deshaun Jackson here versus the Washington football team. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. I like Zach Ertz from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Washington football team, who had the 4th worst defense overall last year, and they also gave up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Zach Ertz averaged 14.6 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 9 targets per game. He's going to be about 16% owned. He was on the field for 80% of the snaps last year. He's projected at 13.8 fantasy points here in week 1. He's 5,800 DraftKings salary and 900 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 42.5 points scored in this game, with the Eagles favored by 5.5. Now, Deshaun Jackson is low enough salary where you could stack Zach Ertz and Deshaun Jackson, but I would just pick one of the two. So I like Zach Ertz here versus the Washington football team. Okay, now if you want to save some salary here at the tight end position, take a look at Hayden Hurst from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Seattle Seahawks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they gave up the third most fantasy points to opposing tight ends last year. Now, Hayden Hurst only averaged 4.8 fantasy points per game on the season on an average of 2.4 pass targets per game, but remember, he was competing with Austin Hooper for targets last year. Austin Hooper is now gone from the Atlanta Falcons, so Hayden Hurst is going to be the man. And he did score 15 fantasy points in the last game he played last year off of 6 pass targets. He's projected at 10.2 fantasy points here in week 1. He's $4,300 DraftKings salary and $1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, with the Atlanta Falcons trailing by 2.5. So I love this game. Lots of players that you can stack into this game. I think this makes a great pick at tight end. Save some salary at tight end. Opens up your salary for that running back position that's always expensive. So I like Hayden Hurst here versus the Seattle Seahawks.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.